Picture this, a muddy field in northern France, October 25, 1415. The fate of two kingdoms hangs in the balance. On one side, a young, ambitious English king, Henry V, with a sick, exhausted, and vastly outnumbered army. On the other, the might of France, a glittering host of knights and nobles, confident of a swift and glorious victory. This is the story of the Battle of Agincourt, a clash that would become a legend, a day when the flower of French chivalry was cut down by a storm of English arrows. So, how did we get here? To understand Agincourt, we have to rewind a bit. This wasn't just a random fight, it was a pivotal moment in the 100 Years' War, a sprawling, century-long conflict between England and France over, you guessed it, the French throne. English kings, tracing their lineage back to William the Conqueror, had long-standing claims to French lands. Henry V, a charismatic and determined leader, decided it was time to press that claim. In the summer of 1415, Henry landed a force of about 12,000 men in Normandy. His initial target was the key port city of Harfleur. The siege was brutal and dragged on for weeks. While Henry eventually took the city, it came at a terrible cost. His army was ravaged by dysentery, what they called the bloody flux. Thousands were sick, and thousands more had to be left behind to garrison the captured city. By the time Henry was ready to march, his army had dwindled to perhaps 6,000 to 9,000 men, mostly archers and a small number of men-at-arms. His original plan to march on Paris was now impossible. Henry's new goal was simply to get his weary army to the English-held port of Calais, a safe haven. But the French were not going to let him just walk away. They had been busy gathering a massive army. France's king, Charles VI, suffered from severe mental illness, so the country was effectively run by its powerful nobles, the Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, and Marshal Boucicaut. They shadowed Henry's army, blocking his path, forcing him onto unfavorable ground. Finally, near the village of Agincourt, the French blocked Henry's route to Calais for good. There would be no escape. A battle was inevitable. The night before the battle was grim. The English were cold, hungry, and soaked by a relentless downpour. They knew they were hopelessly outnumbered. Estimates vary, but the French army was at least 3 to 4 times larger, maybe even more. They had tens of thousands of fresh, well-equipped soldiers, including a huge contingent of heavily armored knights, the pride of France. For the French, the mood was one of utter confidence. They were so sure of victory that they reportedly spent the night playing dice for the English prisoners they would capture the next day. As dawn broke on St. Crispin's Day, the battlefield was a sea of mud. The recent rains had turned the ploughed fields between two woods into a sticky, treacherous quagmire. This narrow, muddy terrain would become a crucial and fatal factor for the French. Henry V, a master tactician, knew his only hope lay in his archers. The English longbow was a fearsome weapon. In the hands of a skilled archer, it could fire up to 10 or 12 arrows a minute, with enough power to pierce armor at range. Henry positioned his army defensively. He placed his men-at-arms in the center, with 2 large wedges of longbowmen on the flanks. Crucially, he ordered his archers to hammer sharpened, 6-foot-long stakes into the ground in front of them, creating a deadly makeshift fence to impale charging cavalry. For hours, the two armies just stood there, staring each other down across the muddy field. The French, confident in their numbers, were waiting for more reinforcements and expected the English to attack. But Henry wasn't falling for that. He knew his starving army couldn't wait forever. In a bold and risky move, he ordered his entire force to advance within extreme longbow range, about 250 to 300 yards. They pulled up their stakes, moved forward, and hammered them back into the ground. It was an incredible act of discipline and a direct challenge to the French. The French nobility, incensed by this audacity from a peasant army, could wait no longer. The first wave of mounted knights charged, and this is where the genius of Henry's plan and the disaster for the French began. As the horses galloped forward, they churned the already soft ground into a deeper bog. Then, the sky darkened. The English longbowmen unleashed the first volley. A storm of thousands upon thousands of arrows rained down on the French cavalry. The effect was devastating. The bodkin point arrows punched through the weaker points in the knights' armor. Horses, less protected than their riders, were wounded, panicked, and became uncontrollable. They crashed into each other, threw their riders, and turned back in terror. trampling the French infantry advancing behind them. The charge dissolved into chaos before it even reached the English lines. The few who made it were impaled on the archers' stakes. What followed was even worse. The main French force, the first two waves of dismounted men-at-arms, began their slow, agonizing advance on foot. Imagine trying to walk across a field of thick, sticky mud while wearing 60 to 70 pounds of steel plate armor, all while thousands of arrows are raining down on you. It was exhausting. They were packed so tightly together they could barely lift their arms to swing their weapons. The mud sucked at their feet, slowing them to a crawl. By the time they finally reached the English line, they were breathless, exhausted, and disorganized. The English men-at-arms, less heavily armored and on firmer ground, met them head-on. The English archers, having used up their arrows, dropped their bows, grabbed swords, axes, and mallets, and swarmed in from the flanks. It turned into a brutal, close-quarters slugfest. But the French were so exhausted and cramped that they were easy targets. They were pulled down into the mud and unable to get up under their own weight, were either killed or drowned. The sheer press of men from behind meant that those in the front couldn't retreat. They were simply pushed forward to their deaths. Heaps of bodies began to pile up, creating gruesome walls of the dead and dying. The second French wave pushed forward, only to meet the same fate, stumbling over the bodies of their comrades and getting stuck in the mud, all while being hacked at by the English. The battle, which the French thought would be over in minutes, had turned into a one-sided slaughter. Within about 3 hours, the French attack had completely collapsed. Thousands lay dead or wounded, and many more were taken prisoner, a huge number of them high-ranking, dukes, counts, and barons. But the day was not yet over. In a controversial and grim moment, a report reached Henry that the French were regrouping for a new attack on his rear, possibly from the third French line that had largely stayed out of the fight. At the same time, a local French lord raided Henry's baggage train, which was lightly guarded. Fearing he couldn't fight off a fresh attack while also guarding thousands of prisoners, Henry made a ruthless decision. He ordered the execution of most of the French captives. It was a brutal act, against the codes of chivalry, but for Henry, it was a matter of survival. His exhausted men carried out the grim task. By the end of the day, the field was a scene of unimaginable carnage. French losses were catastrophic. While exact numbers are debated, they lost several thousand nobles and knights, including the Constable of France himself. English losses, by contrast, were astonishingly light, perhaps only a few hundred. Agincourt was a humiliating disaster for France, and a legendary triumph for Henry V and England. It didn't win the war outright, but its impact was immense. It shattered the French military leadership and morale, proving that a well-led army of common soldiers with the right tactics and technology could defeat a much larger force of aristocratic knights. For Henry, it solidified his claim and reputation. It led to the Treaty of Troyes 5 years later, where he was named heir to the French throne. The story of Agincourt, immortalized by Shakespeare, became a symbol of English resilience and courage against overwhelming odds. It was a day when the longbow triumphed over the lance, when commoners defeated nobles, and when a muddy field in France became the graveyard of a generation of French chivalry. A truly incredible moment in history. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most famous battles, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments what battle you'd like to see covered next. See you in the next one.